I'm not like one of the guys that says, let's go be a Book of Acts church. We need to be the church that God's made us to be. Like, God's got new things in each age, right? But the essence of the early church, where they knew their identity was, the church means we are called out to be separate. And that's separate from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, that's separate from, and you fill in whatever your cause is, whatever your activism is, whoever, I mean, I'm not against people marching, but I'm saying like, whoever you might march with, the church doesn't lie down in any of those beds if it's to stay faithful. Welcome back. Brian Sanders, thanks for being here. How we doing?
Hey, Mike. Good.
We are talking about the future of the church, and let's just jump right in and talk about the death of evangelicalism. That's the tweet I saw when someone said, "Is not evangelicalism dead?" Brian, take it from here.
Is it dead? What do you think?
What is evangelicalism?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, define our terms. Straw man.
I think everyone loves to say right now, hey, don't call me an evangelical.
Yeah.
If by evangelical what you mean is mean-spirited, judgmental, co-opted by your political party.
I remember in the formation of the underground of our story, we had this really contentious discussion about whether we should use the word church. Right. You know, because for a minute there, we could have talked about missional communities or something like that, or created a new term. And it was really a challenging, at least for our team, to kind of debate this. It was a really challenging moment because so many of us wanted to distance ourselves from what that meant to people, right? It's we've talked about this before, but that fallacy of equivocation. You mean something by this word.
Correct.
I mean something else by the word, but we're both using the same word.
Which happens all the time.
Happens all the time in all kinds of things, yeah. And so what do? You know, do you abandon the word, start over, start fresh? You know, like we've talked about, like believers, disciples in the Muslim world might not want to call themselves Christian because to them, you know, you're in a taxi and in the Arab world and you say, take me to the Christian part of town. They'll take you to the brothels and the
bars.
Yeah, the bars and that's the Christian part of town. So you recognize, okay, you don't mean what I mean when we say that. So let's just not use it. I'm a follower of Jesus or something like that. So to abandon the word, or do you become a part of trying to rehabilitate the word? You know, is that your job? And man, we debated that because many of us were like, why would we fight that fight? We want to go create missional communities and what we would call microchurches eventually. We don't need that extra fight with Christians or people in general. Let's just create a new term. But it felt like church was so central. The word church was so central to what it means to be the people of God that we were. It was worth trying to rehabilitate it or trying to give it new meaning, at least for us.
That's very interesting.
So I wonder if it's similar with this idea of evangelicalism. What makes me sad is if we are going to walk away from the term, which is actually fine. I mean, if we need to do that,
I was going to say, I'm not sure the term evangelical is worth.
It's not worth fighting over.
Not
well,
like
here we are again,
church.
same thing. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So is this the same? But what makes me sad is that at its core, it has to do with good news, right? That's what the people of the good news, the people that talk about good news.
That is the tragedy.
And are we really want to abandon that?
But I think people are, because all you are hearing, even among believers, especially the more activistic you get, is bad news. Like what you hear is decreasing amounts of good news, glad news, and there is all sorts of the bad news that's coming out because right now I think it's, at least I feel the pressure personally to replace. I think CNN was saying that right now social activism has replaced religion for for young people. So like the younger you are, the more, like, it's not like religion has gone away, but the new religion is social activism. So now your religion is what you are defined against. You identify your enemies, and that becomes your functioning. Someone even tweeted that this week. They said, "Whoa, what would all of you guys tweet about if you did not have so many enemies?" Because
but what is even social activism? So I hear social activism, and I see in my mind's eye Francis of Assisi caring for lepers, and
no, I think it's at this point it's raising awareness.
So even that, like, okay, let's get to these sort of root terms, and some things which, in their heart, in their initial construction, is something profoundly important or profoundly Christian, or but they've lost their meaning, they've lost their way. Do we just keep abandoning the terms and creating new ones? And maybe you're right. Maybe it's not worth the fight. And if it's become so contaminated, so toxic, this word, I'm fine with abandoning it. We can come up with a new one. But as long as we know that one too will become contaminated by our sinfulness and by our brokenness and by our nominalism. Like, to me, the problem is too many people have called themselves evangelical Christians who aren't Christian, actually. They're not.
This is correct.
They don't actually, Jesus is not the defining person in their life,
right? Right.
So I just wonder if we're always going to have that challenge of, I am this, but other people claim to be that. I don't know. Let's say you're a Republican person. There's mean Republicans, loads of them. A Democrat, there are mean Democrats. So what do? Do you say, well, I'm not that kind of Democrat, or I'm not that kind of Republican, or I want to hold this point of view, but I want to do it with respect and kindness and civility towards others. I feel like we're always going to have to be delineating not just an ideology that you hold, but the way in which you hold it. And maybe that's a part of the renegotiation that we have to do with these terms. It's perfectly fine to walk away from evangelicalism if that's what you need to do, because you just don't think it's true enough to Jesus, or because you've bailed on Jesus. But it doesn't mean that there aren't people that hold that point of view in a way that has integrity. And I think maybe the bigger contaminant is this idea in our heads where we can just make sweeping statements about all kinds of people, and to completely objectify and negate an entire group of people. Even the word evangelical, mostly when people use it in social discourse, they mean white people. But there has been traditionally in the black church a high value on the gospel and on teaching, living, and cherishing the good news and the preaching of the good news, evangelism, right? So what does that mean? Do they don't get evangelism because too many white evangelicals voted for a certain person that we don't like or something? It's just the whole thing is problematic. And I think not just deconstructing something like evangelicalism, or really what people are doing is deconstructing their experience of evangelicalism, which I think is a perfectly valid and probably even healthy thing to do. But then to apply that to people you have never met, in places you have never been, in contexts and cultures you have never known, to go just across the board and say, I now know all evangelicals and the way they think and what they do and who they are, is it's problematic.
I was just reading a book by someone in another country, and they kept on using the term evangelical because it was the only way to really make it clear we believe in Jesus, we take a high view of the scripture, and we're trying to go serve this world and bring this news. And that was the only term that they had. And I kept on cringing when I saw it. I was thinking, oh man, don't you realize, like, no, this word doesn't work anymore. And the book was written in the 1990s. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess it was okay for her to use it. So even for me as I'm going through that. But it made me just think through, okay, what are we talking about now? And do we have ears to hear Because there is a legitimate critique that I think we need to be deconstructing, that we do need to be wrestling with. When people say, I'm not even sure I can call myself an evangelical, I do want to know, like, wait, what's going on there? You know, like what is happening in someone's heart there? I think about Constantine, you know, so prior to Constantine, Christians, as long as they were believers, they were always very clear that we are totally separate from any system of this world. That's what they would say. Like, that's what early Christians for hundreds of years would have said. Constantine, it seems like something changed where since Constantine, the church, Christians, whatever brand you want to give them, has been confused about our identity. Like there's been this confusion. Early Christians were hated by Rome, and they were hated by any ism. Like there was a sense in which people just knew, no, we don't lie down. The Son of Man has no place to rest his head. You know, the foxes have holes, birds have nests, even referring to like different political stripes. The Son of Man, Jesus, has nowhere to rest his head. To be faithful to Jesus, you could not lie down on any political side. Like you at least biblically speaking, you could. There seems to be this Constantine sort of influence on, even now when you'll see people, yes, we're going to rise up and we're going to find places of power within these systems of the world. And I'm just not sure that's ever how God's promised to do it. So when I'm thinking of the future, I'm just wondering if the ultimate future of the church, and I do not think we need to go, I'm not like one of the guys that says, let's go be a Book of Acts church. We need to be the church that God's made us to be. Like God's got new things in each age, right? But the essence of the early church, where they knew their identity was, the church means we are called out to be separate. And that's separate from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, that's separate from, and you fill in whatever your cause is, whatever your activism is, I'm not against people marching, but I'm saying like whoever you might march with, the church doesn't lie down in any of those beds if it's to stay faithful.
It's interesting you bring up Constantine, because I would argue that Constantine is the first imposter. He's the first fake Christian.
Yeah.
The first of many.
Right.
He's the sort of Paul to nominal Christianity. You know, the first. Because essentially he has this thing that happens on a battlefield where, you know,
tell the story.
The Christian flag is raised and he wins, and so he's like, okay, that's powerful. Right. I'm going to make that my brand, my marker, my logo, right? Who can say whether his conversion was real? But we know that part of his story is nothing to do with an actual conversion to Jesus, but it was an encounter with something he thought was powerful. Some sort of a totem, not not a living relationship with Jesus. But then it became possible then it became advantageous politically. Of course, the Edict of Milan was a good thing, to say let's not persecute people for their religious beliefs. That's a good thing. And then the next step of making sort of Christianity the state religion. Well, now it's like, okay, it's to my advantage to say I'm a Christian. So now you have this proliferation of imposters, right? Of people who actually don't have a heart encounter with Jesus, a surrendered conversion to Jesus and to his way. Soteriologically, there's nothing there, but they want to run around and say they're Christian, and then
because it's to their advantage to do so.
Because it's to their advantage, because you can do more business or networking or whatever to be a part of that. It became a cultural reality, not just a spiritual or inner reality. To your point, up to that point, you couldn't have been. Nobody would have claimed to be a Christian, because you could lose your life for that or be imprisoned for that. So why would you lie about that unless you're just a sadist or something? So presumably nobody ever did that until Constantine. And now we have that possibility, that reality, that there are reasons to sort of accept a cultural description of yourself as Christian that have nothing to do actually with Jesus. And this brings us back to the issue of the gospel and the missionary life, that I feel like that is the new line of demarcation now. Is not just what do you believe, but will you offer that to the world? Will you bravely put yourself in social harm's way to say, I believe in Jesus, and I believe this is true for you and for everyone, and I believe this is good news for the whole world, even if I'm mocked or ridiculed or lose my job or whatever, that becomes the new line of delineation between, and you know, I don't mean it to be this way, but to say, if you're really a Christian or you're not a Christian, you know, I mean, it's more nuanced than that, but because of Constantine, because of that possibility existing of being just a cultural Christian or a nominal Christian, how do I know? How do we know? What's the fruit of somebody that really loves Jesus? And to me, it is a love of the good news. It is a willingness to proclaim, to preach the kerygma in the world, to say to a world that doesn't want to hear. Right. This one who you pierced has died for you, for your sin, to reconcile you to God, and to destroy all the works of the evil one, and to bring justice and righteousness to this world. Sometimes that's popular, sometimes it's not popular, but that holding on to that message
I'll
is
tell you
what
what's
makes
hard.
us.
It is very hard to not throw out the baby.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just an awful metaphor, by the way.
It is. But you know, that when everyone always says, you know, don't throw out the baby with the bath, the reality is that that does get done constantly, where when we say, hey, eat the meat, spit out the bones, we consistently spit out the meat with the bones, you know. So the truth of the matter is, I think you and I would both agree, if by evangelical you mean white nationalist, oh, we renounce that.
Hard pass. Yeah.
If by evangelical what you mean is judgmental, we condemn that. If by evangelical...
And so did Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if by evangelical you mean holding on to the often forgotten, always neglected, but regularly forgotten aspect of the absolute supremacy of Jesus and necessity of his redemption, then that has to stay there somehow.
And the proclamation of that to the world.
That's correct. Like
yeah.
the idea of that we are those that we have been sent. Like when everyone says, well, I'm trying to figure out my purpose in life. Well, anyone that's listening to this or watching this right now, just so you know, part of your purpose in life, regardless of your personality type, regardless of your Enneagram, regardless of your spiritual gifts, you are called to proclaim the greatness and splendor of Jesus.
And that, you know, when Jesus sends out the first teams, missionary teams from his own side, you know, he gives them the assignment to preach good news,
right?
The good news of the kingdom, to heal the sick, and to cast out demons. And we've talked about this, but I think those three circles that is still for me the definition of mission, is the proclamation of the good news of the kingdom still today. The work of healing, that word in Greek is therapos, you know, it's to help people.
Therapeutic effect.
It's therapy. It's to help people be better, to be healthier than they were before. That's still a part of our mission. And then this confrontation of evil,
right,
in all its forms, in all its manifestations. And maybe in the first century that looked like, you know, deliverance from an evil spirit. And maybe in our time it means deliverance from evil systems. You know, I don't know.
Or all of the above.
But it's confronting evil. Right. And those three things are still the core mission. If you neglect any one of those, you know, you lose something about the fullness of the power of what Jesus is actually offering to the world. And for me, to be evangelical is to say yes to all three of those, actually, not to just be about preaching the gospel. And if all you care about is preaching something and getting more people in your church and having more people pray some sinner's prayer, but you don't care about healing of the people around you who are suffering, evil, or addressing and confronting evil in your time, is that really the gospel?
Right.
You know, or if you just care about healing and you stop talking about Jesus, or you stop talking about the good news, or you stop calling people to repentance, is that really the fullness of the kingdom? No. So all three are important. It's easy to see how we could lean into one of the three and not the others. But when we do that, we lose something critical. And I think that's part of what's happened to evangelicalism, is that it became just about this transaction, you know, praying some prayer, adding to our numbers, baptizing people, something like that. And the rest of it, the healing and the confrontation of evil, for example, you know, the evil of racism in our nation, the history of the evil of racial bias and racial hatred, really, economic, social, spiritual, everything. If all you're doing is the one thing, then you'll have no occasion to consider the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have people that say, well, what does race have anything to do with the gospel or the Bible or anything like that? What an ignorant thing to say.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But there we are. And those people are running around saying we are evangelical.
Right.
Right. And now we have that equivocation problem.
And I think that's part of what we're actually hearing behind someone saying, if by evangelical you mean proclamation of words that do not affect do not bring a therapeutic effect because...
Or reinforce racial bias.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep preaching this thing, but I'm also going to, I don't know, continue to exclude black people from the housing market or in my town, or not do business with them, or, repress and or say racist things, whatever.
Right.
So that's going on, right? People are in churches on Sunday, hooping, celebrating Jesus, claiming him.
Right.
And walking out into these systems and saying, there's no problem here.
It's faith without works.
Okay, yeah.
Faith without works is dead. And I think that's what people have called the church on the carpet about. Hey, I hear your sermons, but I'm not seeing it affect the culture. It's what made someone like a Charles Finney so captivating for me when I was a young believer. One of the first books I read was Finney and about how he would go and he would convert people, but as soon as they got up off of their knees, he had them sign up for abolition. Like, hey, if you're going to follow, if you're saved, then you're going to go save. If you've been delivered, then you're going to go deliver, because good trees bear good fruit, and so we're going to demand that.
Even then, you had the lion's share of kind of white Christian male leaders missing the mark.
Right.
But you had the Finneys and the Wesleys and the Spurgeons saying, no, slavery's wrong, racism is wrong. So even then it was possible to see. It's not like, it was just so opaque that no one could have seen it then.
Right.
No, people saw it.
Right.
And even white people.
Yeah, George Whitefield preached the evangelical gospel and left slavery not just intact, but reinforced.
Right, so has that really changed? No, we still have the possibility that you can miss the social dimensions of the gospel in our time.
Yeah, the humility, we talked about this last podcast. I think the humility, let's just keep on using this trifecta that you're describing here, though. This idea of proclamation of a gospel, of the central piece of Jesus, and making that he's the great spectacle, that he's the great centerpiece. This therapy that things do get better. And even theologians would call this redemption and lift, that when the gospel has gone places the way it should, there is a redemption and lift, that regardless of the culture, could be third world, second world, first world, wherever the gospel has truly gone, there's been a therapeutic effect. It's an interesting phenomenon. And the confrontation of evil, that we do lift our voice for those who are oppressed, that we do justice, love, mercy, walk humbly, that we speak for those who are mute. The reality, the humility maybe that we need to hear is, I think all of us listening right now or watching probably move in one of those directions naturally. Like, there probably are some people that I've really enjoyed James Baldwin, for example. James Baldwin's an interesting civil rights, a potent civil rights voice in the last, half century, 75 years or whatever, over on some issues. So like an absolute voice in some, and it was hard for Christians that would hear him, because they'd say, I love what he's saying on these areas. I wish he was holistic and did anything over here. And there is that trouble that people have where I think we can sometimes self-justify when we're really strong in one area. And so I think evangelicals have self-justified because they have proclaimed the words of the gospel. I think other people have self-justified as they've, like, there's some people just doing good works. I'm thinking of things like people that bring water to those that don't have water, people that are just doing good therapeutic works of healing, whatever. And then others that are really confronting, maybe doing one of those. But what I hear people say, Brian, is, hey, wait, why aren't you doing this in Jesus' name? Like, because I've actually talked to people on this. Like, I've talked to believers that they were hitting on one part of their activism, and I'd say, hey, man, are you ever going to say something about this over here? And they'd say, no, man, I got to stay in my lane. I'm like, wait, you got to stay in your, wait, you can't mention Jesus. Now I will lose some of my support base. They're like, don't get me wrong, Mike, I'm a believer and I love Jesus, but I can't do stuff in his name, or I can't take up these other causes. I mean, take something like, when I'm talking to someone about one issue and then I bring up another issue and I say, hey, could you not also bring this? Like, no, I'll alienate. Like I've talked to pro-life people that are really into, justice for the unborn. I'm like, hey, why aren't you speaking out on Black lives? Like, well, I don't want to alienate my base. Or I've talked to people on Black lives that, hey, why don't you ever bring up the unborn? I don't want to, I got to stay in my lane. The reality is, staying in your lane allows you to avoid persecution, but it does not allow you to follow Jesus all the way. And what I have found is, if we're going to follow Jesus completely, it's going to have to be the holistic approach. And I think that's what the church has missed.
Yeah, and what is the body, how does the body metaphor apply in this situation where, okay, let's say I'm a counselor or a nurse or something.
Right.
And actually I've devoted my whole life to healing, to therapy, to seeing people get well or become more well than they were when they encountered me. And I pray every day in Jesus' name that he would help me do that, because I know that it is core to what it means to be his hands, his feet, his voice in the world. It is, 100%. And you can do that in such a way that definitely glorifies God, that bears witness to the kingdom. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when we start disrespecting the other two spheres and feeling like this is all there is. This is all there is. And of course, not recognizing in humility, that actually I do this part, which is critical and beautiful and important and does bear witness to the kingdom, but it's just a facet. And I need my brothers and sisters who are proclaiming, and I need the people that are confronting evil and doing activism and so on. And that together is a picture of the kingdom.
That's great.
Not just what I do. So I'm fine with people, quote, staying in their lane as long as they have like incredible levels of honor and respect for their brothers and sisters who are in a different lane. And together, if we had that sort of union of greater purpose, which is the kingdom itself.
Part of the danger I'm seeing right now, though, is, I was talking, someone was really upset with me, for example, on the abortion issue. And they're like, hey, your silence is compliance. Your silence makes you...
You're silent about that?
In their mind, I was too silent, right? So they were saying your silence is compliance. And just so I'm crystal clear here, I believe I would affirm the dignity and the image of God in an unborn human. So I'm crystal clear. I think I'm very crystal clear on that. Very orthodox in my... I would agree with what's been the position of the church for thousands of years. But in their mind, your silence is compliance. So not only, to which I was like, but I've actually even have a track record of speaking. Yeah, but it's not enough. It's like, okay. Now, when I asked them to speak up on some other issues, their answer was, no, I just have to stay in my lane. And it was really disturbing me. I was like, wait, you feel the freedom to stay in your lane, but if I don't speak out, not even just at all, but as much as you want, you're not telling me to stay in my lane. You're telling me I have to, by definition, get in your lane. I think even culturally, this has been part of the whole, when justice ceased being something that you do and started being something that you simply post about on social media. Like what the average social activist now is just someone that posts on social media. And what they want me, you, all of anybody to do is to repost or to say the same things that they're saying with the threat of your silence is compliance, and you're complicit in the sins that we're trying to address if you do not. In other words, you better get in my lane or else you're part of the problem. Like you need to join me. So what would you say the balance on that is? Because I certainly feel the pressure, and I could think of 5 different issues right now where people have said some version of, hey, if you don't get in my lane with me right now, then I think something's going, I think you're off, and I think you are to be rebuked, and I think you're actually part of the problem,
Well, I guess at one level, I think it's a good challenge. Like I want to hear if I tend towards the prophetic, like I'm somebody who by nature wants to go find the evil system, the evil idea, and go pick a fight with it, right? And preaching the kingdom and healing is maybe not my natural. So if someone says you're not doing enough of this preaching or enough of this healing, I think maybe that's a good check for me to say, yeah, maybe you're right. And Lord, how can I make that a more part of my heart? Because I want to reflect you as fully as I can in my life, But the other side of that is don't negotiate with terrorists. So anybody that tells you ought to do X, Y, Z, or you're not doing this, I mean, I just don't care, and I don't have time for that. And I don't think we should. I don't think we should be afraid of people that want to put that kind of pressure on us, that want to define us by what we post or don't post on social media. Social media is, it's a flash in the pan. It's an iteration of culture. It's not the arena of all life and integrity and godliness. It's not. It's just not. I'm sorry, it's not. It's like talking on radio shows or something like that. It's a lovely thing, and it's a place that people get. If you never spoke on a radio show, it doesn't mean you're not a fully formed human person with a calling and a heart and being faithful to your family and to that calling and to God. It's like ridiculous. So whether you want to post something on social media or not, I suppose that's up to your own conscience. But people putting that kind of pressure on us, that in of itself feels wrong. And maybe we all need to draw lines and say, I can't be,
I'm here to please God.
Yeah, good, thank you. And that desire to please the mob or whatever. This
honestly got shut down recently when I was talking with someone, and because they're like, hey, are you going to speak out on, and I, as a leader, anyone that's listening to this, just please know, on the regular, people are sending me things like, hey, you are going to speak on the, like, I demand some version of, we really, really expect you, whatever. And I said to this one disciple, I said, hey, I know you're very passionate about this. Just so you know, like, my goal, I really want to follow Jesus, who said, I only do what I see the Father doing. Like, if that's what Jesus is saying, then for sure, like, I do look back on the church in the 16, 17, 1800s, 1900s in the United States of America, 2000s in the United States in America, where I think, why did you not speak out? Like, you were not hearing God's voice to not speak. I'm saying, I'm using it as a broad stroke because there were exceptions, but so I absolutely, and that is how I feel about whether it's the abortion issue, whether it's Black lives, whether it's right now, there's so much going on outside. Maybe the biggest things happening in the world right now are not even in the United States. When I think about Syrian refugees, when I think about things that are taking place in other countries, I'm thinking, man, who is going to speak on their behalf? But at the end of the day, this maybe kind of segues in. I think perhaps part of the answer to this is actually what you just mentioned, the different parts of the body. When I think of Ephesians 4, how it says God has given apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, I have not found health coming from someone being exposed to one of those five. But when you get exposed to all five, there seems to be the right balance of what need, we were talking about, there was a book that I read called Wizards and Prophets, and the idea was that wizards will come up with stuff. They'll come up with innovations and ideas, and they're wizard-like. Prophets, they remind us of our limits, and they remind us of, take environmentalism. Prophets will be like, hey, conserve. Don't use too much. Don't overdo it. Don't tax the system too much. Wizards are like, come on, man, think abundantly. Have an abundance mindset, and let's come up with ideas. There's all kinds of resources, and the reality is, even like in environmentalism, even right now, like there's this tension between people that love the environment, want to care about the environment, and yet they haven't really found a way to come together. And this was like just a secular book, but the idea of the book was, if only you could get wizards and prophets to come together, which for us is almost very much, wizards are like apostolic innovators and entrepreneurial. And the prophetic people, if only we could get apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers to all fully be in their lane, but to see it like a 5-lane highway. Like we as the people of God are being exposed to all of them. I mean, we're kind of expanding on the metaphor here of those 3 areas, but from earlier. But if we could get that happening, I think we would hit a sweet spot where we will appropriately call out injustice and evil and unrighteous and even the demonic. There are demonic things. I mean, when I read that tweet earlier this week and they said, what would all of you do if you didn't have someone? How would you build your brand without all these enemies? And I'm like, the irony is we actually have an enemy. There actually is a principality and power that's a lot worse than the political enemies that we're fighting on social media. Yeah. If we could ever go fight that, like if we could ever get to that place.
You do not wrestle against flesh and blood.
But we are wrestling against flesh and blood.
So that error, why is Paul saying to the Ephesian church, you don't wrestle against flesh and blood? because they're wrestling against flesh and blood. He's saying,
Correct.
guys, no.
Right.
No.
Right.
It's powers and principalities. It's that third sphere, right? Get in that third sphere and fight the actual enemy.
Yeah.
And it's not each other.
Right.
It's not each other. I mean, I read a book recently called The Numbers Game. It was these two researchers looking at soccer. I really love soccer. And they were talking about, this.
We call it football.
Yeah.
Around here.
Mostly they call it football, yeah. Well, and they're British guys, I think, so they were looking at football. But, if you look at soccer as a team sport, they were saying the way to make it better, what they call is a weak link team sport, weak link game. That is to say, if you really want to make a team better, you don't add a superstar. You try to find the weakest part of the team and improve those people slightly. Just get a couple people that are better than them. Because the way soccer works is there's this link-up play, right? To score a goal, everyone's going to touch the ball. You might have 20, 30 passes as a move before the ball goes in the net. So you could have amazing players, but the two midfielders are poor. They're going to touch the ball. And if they make the wrong pass or lose the ball, that move is over. That play is over. And that will always continue to happen. It's a weak link game. So if you want to improve that team, you have to find the weakest players and improve them. As a contrast to that would be something like basketball. If you look at the NBA, if you really want to improve your team, you get a superstar. One great player can completely transform a team because the way that game works, of course, there's fewer players, but also the way that works is that in a clutch moment, you just give it to
Get the ball to
Michael. Give it to LeBron James, and he can get you those points. He can play that.
Yeah, Steph
moment
Curry
of
can
defense.
shoot from the other side of the court.
He sure can. So that's what he would call a strong link, what they call a strong link team sport. So the question about the church is it a strong link team sport or is it a weak link sport? And we have made the error of thinking it's a strong link.
The celebrity pastor.
Bring in the ace.
Superstar.
Yeah, bring in the ace. That'll make the church awesome. It doesn't.
Right.
That actually it's a weak link thing. And so to your point about APES, and I've watched you use that as a kind of diagnostic tool to go into a team or a plant or something and say, do we have all 5 of these here? And if we don't, then that's a break. And so actually it's not about having an incredible apostolic leader or prophetic leader or evangelistic leader or whatever. It's about, do we have all of these?
Right.
And if we don't, we have to fill that gap. And actually the weakest part of that team is where you would want to see growth and then
that's a really, really fascinating
So that
image.
parity, if you had even if they were just sort of humble, ordinary
that.
people, but they're all 5 of them were playing well together, I think you'd see.
Well, I like that too, because I think you're right. I think there can be an overpowering of whatever it is. Like in the American church, I think it's pretty obvious that it's been a shepherd, teacher-led group. And so what you have are these theological, doctrinal guardians that have rejoiced in their exposition of the scriptures, or even if there's no justice being done, even if there's no souls turning to the Lord and becoming disciples. But if you actually got it to where, because I think you're right, if you've got a strong link, then that's going to, by definition, overpower all the others. But if you got it to where all of these are strong and they're going to...
Or even just okay.
No, that's right.
But you had everyone. Yeah.
No, but you're right. Because I think even if you're not a shepherd, like to have that humanizing element of the shepherd's voice that reminds you of the nature of Jesus or the prophetic part of Jesus or the teaching part of Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the apex. I mean, he's all... I believe the best microchurches I've been in are the microchurches when you've got all 5 there. The best churches I've been a part of, best moments in church have been when all 5 of those elements are happening. So I just think there's something to this that I think the future, if you were asking me, how could the future of the church look brighter? I would say release the APES, because I think if you released the APES, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, wizards, and prophets, and healers, and you throw all this in there, I think you would see the proclamation of the gospel and the therapeutic healing come to pass, and the confrontation of darkness, both on earth, as in the spirit realm, yeah. And I think maybe that's how we'll maybe close this one out, to say that this future of the church, that if we would embrace the giftedness that God has already loaded, the genius of God's design I think does give us what it takes if we would just release it. Any closing thoughts before we call today?
No, you said it.
Thanks for joining us today, Brian. Thanks for being with us. Hope you'll join us next time. You're welcome to like this, subscribe, anything like that, and we will see some of you at a Microchurch Conference. If you are hearing this after this or watching this after the fact, I believe we will have some archives where you might be able to go back and watch this. But until next time, live green.